Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Stephanie of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen and Elisabeth of Wied. Each carved her place in Europe's royal legacy, walking through opulent courts and confronting the fragility of life and love with quiet resilience. Let us begin with the first, Stephanie of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. Stephanie of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen was born on the 15th of July in the year 1837 at Kroechenhuis Castle in the southern German Principality of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. What shaped this young noblewoman from a modest German duchy into the queen of a distant kingdom? Why did a life so full of promise last barely beyond her 22nd birthday? What did she see, feel, and hope for in a world where duty and destiny collided so quickly? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Stephanie was the first daughter of Charles Anthony, the reigning Prince of Hohenzollern, and Princess Josephine of Baden. Her family, though not ruling a large empire, was deeply woven into Europe's noble web. Her mother was the granddaughter of a Grand Duke and the adopted daughter of Napoleon's stepdaughter, a lineage that ensured Stephanie was raised with both tradition and ambition. Her early years at Kroechenhuis were filled with structured education, elegance, and the quiet discipline of a household aware of its position. The scenic Danube countryside surrounded her childhood home, but the ambitions of her family would soon lead her far from its peaceful paths. Even in those early days, a crown was never far from view. Stephanie's childhood unfolded within the ivy-covered walls of Kroechenhuis Castle, a place of quiet nobility nestled in the hills of southwestern Germany. Though her father's principality was modest in size, the Hohenzollern household was anything but ordinary. Surrounded by stately courtyards and meticulously maintained gardens, young Stephanie grew up in an atmosphere of cultivated grace and structured propriety. Her daily life followed a rhythm shaped by aristocratic discipline. Tutors were carefully chosen to provide instruction in languages, history, court etiquette, and music. French and Latin were essential, but so too was the art of diplomacy, a skill her parents subtly encouraged. Her mother, Princess Josephine, brought warmth and refinement, often reading stories with her daughters or guiding them in embroidery and charity work. Her father, Prince Charles Anthony, was more reserved, but he understood the importance of preparing his children for Europe's shifting political landscape. Despite the expectations of court life, there was space for play and imagination. Stephanie and her siblings explored the castle grounds, often accompanied by governesses or young cousins. In these early years, bonds were formed, including with her brother Leopold and younger sibling Carol, who would one day become King of Romania. Stephanie's upbringing balanced gentleness with preparation, affection with ambition. Beneath the formal layers of nobility, there lived a sensitive, intelligent girl whose destiny would soon stretch beyond the forests of Sigmaringen, toward the splendor and sorrow of an unfamiliar throne. As Stephanie grew, her early charm matured into a reputation for grace, intelligence, and self-possession, qualities shaped by her parents' insistence on a disciplined, royal education. Though her principality was small, her family saw beyond its borders. They knew their daughter's destiny would likely lead her into one of Europe's more powerful courts, and so her education was modeled after those of grander monarchies. Fluent in multiple languages, including French, German, and Portuguese later in life, Stephanie became known for her clarity of speech and poise in conversation. She received instruction not just in academics, but in diplomacy, religion, court traditions, and the arts of hosting. Piano and watercolor lessons helped refine her sensibilities, while long readings of philosophy and literature introduced her to the intellectual world of the 19th century. Her mother oversaw much of this training with a gentle but watchful eye, instilling in Stephanie both etiquette and empathy. The family's Catholic faith also played a key role, emphasizing duty to others and humility in one's position. But it was not all solemn preparation. There were warm summer days, occasional trips to Baden, and letters exchanged with royal cousins. Stephanie's demeanor reflected a quiet confidence, not born of arrogance but of careful preparation. By the time she reached her teenage years, she was not merely a princess. She was a royal asset, ready to represent her house on a larger stage. And when royal suitors began to inquire, it became clear that her education had not been in vain. Stephanie's position in Europe's noble web was not just ceremonial, it was deeply strategic. Her family, the House of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, though ruling a minor principality, was remarkably connected. Her father, Charles Anthony, maintained strong ties with both Prussian and Catholic dynasties, navigating the political complexities of mid-19th century Europe with notable skill. Her maternal ancestry further strengthened her profile. Stephanie's grandfather was the Grand Duke of Baden, and her grandmother, Stephanie de Beauharnais, had been adopted by Napoleon himself. This connection linked her not only to France's imperial legacy, but also to a wider sphere of European diplomacy. Such lineage gave Stephanie an uncommon blend of German, French, and Napoleonic heritage, a valuable balance in a continent shaped by shifting alliances. These connections extended even further. Stephanie was the older sister of Carol, who would eventually become King Carol I of Romania and aunt to King Albert I of Belgium. Her brother Leopold, a key figure in German politics, was closely tied to Prussian ambitions. These bloodlines were not just threads of genealogy, they were levers of influence. And for a court looking to secure political goodwill without upsetting Europe's delicate balance of power, Stephanie was an ideal choice. When the Portuguese royal family began their search for a bride for their young king, it was no surprise that their gaze fell upon the quiet, well-connected princess from Sigmaringen. In the mid-19th century, Portugal stood at a delicate crossroads. The country had endured waves of political instability, epidemics, and royal uncertainty. With King Pedro V on the throne, a young monarch known for his intellect and modern spirit, there was urgent pressure to find a queen who could support his vision and strengthen international ties. The proposal that followed reached far beyond Iberian borders to the serene hills of Sigmaringen. Stephanie's candidacy was no accident. Her upbringing, character, and lineage made her a diplomatic gem. She was Catholic, fluent in court languages, and already admired for her charitable disposition. For King Pedro, whose ideals leaned toward reform and progress, she offered companionship and continuity. And for the Portuguese court, she presented a politically safe union, linked neither to Spain nor the powerful Austrian court, but respected in Prussian and French circles. The match was arranged through careful negotiations, and by early 1858, a formal proposal was accepted. Stephanie, not yet 21, prepared for a life she had only imagined in letters and portraits. Her parents gave their blessing, and court preparations began swiftly. A proxy wedding would be held in Berlin before she set sail for Lisbon. It was a classic dynastic union, wrapped in the rituals of monarchy. But behind the ceremony and expectations stood a real young woman, poised, hopeful, and perhaps quietly uncertain of what awaited her in a land so distant from her own. Before ever setting foot in Portugal, Stephanie was married, not in person, but through one of the most traditional customs of royal diplomacy, a proxy wedding. On the 29th of April in the year 1858, inside the grand interior of St. Hedwig's Cathedral in Berlin, Stephanie stood beneath a vaulted dome, dressed as a bride. But her groom, King Pedro V of Portugal, was hundreds of miles away. In his place stood Stephanie's elder brother, Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern. Acting as the king's proxy, he solemnly recited the vows, ensuring that the political and ceremonial obligations were fulfilled. It was a solemn affair, filled with dignitaries and tradition, blending German precision with Catholic ritual. The symbolism was powerful. A union had been sealed between two countries before the couple had even met in person. Stephanie, composed and graceful, followed each step with quiet dignity. Her letters from that time reveal a mixture of anxiety, curiosity, and dutiful hope. She was aware of the expectations upon her, both as a future queen and as a bridge between cultures. After the proxy ceremony, preparations for her departure intensified. She would soon leave her homeland behind, not just as a bride, but as a monarch in the making. The journey ahead was more than physical. It marked the end of her life as a German princess and the beginning of her brief, luminous chapter as Queen of Portugal. Stephanie's journey to Portugal was more than a bridal procession. It was a voyage into a new identity, a new court, and a new nation. After the proxy wedding in Berlin, she bid farewell to her family and boarded the royal vessel that would carry her toward Lisbon. The voyage lasted several days, filled with prayers, letters, and moments of reflection. She was not just traveling from one country to another, she was crossing into an unfamiliar destiny. When Stephanie arrived in Portugal in May of 1858, she was greeted with all the grandeur befitting a future queen. Lisbon's harbors sparkled with decorated ships, church bells rang across the city, and crowds lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the German princess who would now be theirs. Dressed in elegant silks, Stephanie waved from the royal carriage, her posture calm, her eyes quietly observing the scenes unfolding around her. The differences were immediate. The climate was warmer, the language unfamiliar, and the customs distinct. Yet she embraced the transition with grace. She wrote home that the Portuguese people understood luxury better than dignity, a phrase that revealed both admiration and cultural curiosity. Though still adjusting, she carried herself with composed nobility. Every moment of the journey, from the ship's rocking waves to the scent of orange blossoms in Lisbon's breeze, shaped Stephanie's transformation. No longer just a noble daughter of Germany, she was now a queen-to-be, stepping gently into a court rich with tradition and expectation. On the 18th of May in the year 1858, Stephanie and Pedro V were married in person at the Church of St. Dominic in Lisbon. The city bloomed with festivity as nobles, clergymen, and foreign dignitaries gathered for the royal union. Church bells echoed across the capital, balconies overflowed with flowers, and processions filled the winding streets. It was not merely a marriage, it was the hopeful renewal of a nation still healing from recent sorrow. The king, just months shy of his 21st birthday, stood with a solemn elegance beside his bride. Pedro, often portrayed as thoughtful and reform-minded, seemed captivated by Stephanie's quiet grace. Dressed in regal white, with delicate lace and jewels glinting beneath the cathedral light, Stephanie took her vows in a foreign tongue, her voice steady and clear. After the ceremony, Lisbon welcomed its new queen with jubilation. Crowds cheered as the royal carriage rolled through the avenues. Flags waved, choirs sang, and gun salutes echoed from the hilltops. Stephanie, though unfamiliar with the land, responded with warmth and dignity. Her composure won admiration, her beauty, affection. Behind the formality, however, lay the tender beginnings of a sincere bond. In their brief courtship and first days of marriage, Pedro and Stephanie found mutual respect, shared ideals, and perhaps even the early stirrings of love. The court, for a moment, glowed with the light of new beginnings. Stephanie's first months as Queen Consort of Portugal were marked by both admiration and adaptation. Stepping into the royal household, she navigated the court's expectations with the same grace that had marked her arrival. Though young and far from home, she quickly became a figure of fascination, a German princess whose serene presence brought a new energy to Lisbon's royal scene. She shared a reserved but affectionate relationship with King Pedro, who was deeply committed to modernizing the country. While Portugal faced health crises and political unease, the couple stood as symbols of stability and reform. Stephanie attended state functions, participated in public ceremonies, and began learning Portuguese. Behind palace walls, she cultivated warm relationships with her attendants, often preferring quiet kindness over stern formality. Yet she was not simply a figurehead. Stephanie showed deep concern for the people's well-being, especially the poor and the sick. She visited hospitals, supported charitable causes, and questioned outdated customs. She was particularly drawn to medical reform, advocating for improved hygiene and patient care, a vision that resonated strongly with her husband's public health priorities. Though her time as queen was brief, Stephanie's early efforts revealed a deep sense of responsibility. She viewed her role not just as ceremonial, but as a call to action. Her letters from this period, filled with observations and reflections, reveal a young woman trying earnestly to belong not just to the palace, but to the people of Portugal. Stephanie's time in Portugal was short, but her voice endured through the many letters she wrote to her family in Germany. Addressed mostly to her mother, Princess Josephine of Baden, and her brother Leopold, these personal writings offer a rare glimpse into the heart of a queen who often kept her emotions private in public life. Preserved today in the State Archive of Sigmaringen, the letters reveal a woman of thought, curiosity, and quiet strength. She described Lisbon with vivid detail, its bright light, lively streets, and unfamiliar customs. Yet behind her poetic observations was a quiet loneliness. She missed her homeland deeply and occasionally confessed feeling like a stranger among the crowds. But Stephanie rarely allowed melancholy to overshadow her sense of duty. Her words showed admiration for Pedro's intellect and deep concern for Portugal's challenges, especially its healthcare crisis. In one letter, she remarked on the contrast between grandeur and suffering, lavish royal processions outside palace walls, and epidemics raging just beyond them. She questioned whether her presence could make a difference, and resolved that it must. Her voice carried the weight of someone determined not to waste her role. Stephanie's reflections were gentle but not passive. She offered insight, asked questions, and dreamed of doing more. Through ink and paper, her world came alive, filled with longing, resolve, and the delicate balance between public appearance and personal truth. Among Stephanie's most lasting contributions during her short reign was her devotion to public welfare, especially in the realm of healthcare. Unlike many royal consorts who confined themselves to courtly rituals and appearances, Stephanie sought out the streets, hospitals, and institutions that shaped the lives of ordinary Portuguese citizens. She was not content to merely represent compassion. She acted on it. One of her most notable achievements was the founding and support of several hospitals, aimed at improving access to care and raising the standards of hygiene and medical treatment. Deeply concerned about the prevalence of epidemics such as cholera and diphtheria, she advocated for better sanitary conditions and more humane care for the sick. Her interest in these causes was not a passing fancy, she took a hands-on approach, often visiting patients and listening to the needs of doctors and nurses. These efforts earned her widespread admiration. Though still seen as a foreigner by some, Stephanie's work transcended borders. Her name became associated with reform, empathy, and a queen who genuinely cared. In a time when monarchs were often distant symbols, she chose to be present, not just in ceremonies, but in suffering. Her commitment also complemented King Pedro's reformist mindset, and together they became a rare royal couple who used their influence to push for meaningful change. Stephanie's work in this arena would later be remembered as the brightest legacy of her brief time on the Portuguese throne. Within the grand halls of Necessidade's palace, Stephanie's life as queen consort unfolded quietly, with moments of hope, effort, and tenderness. Though she wore the title for just over a year, her presence left a lasting impression. The Portuguese people, initially curious about their German queen, grew to respect her sincerity. Her refined manners, charitable heart, and gentle tone set her apart in a court that had seen its share of turbulence. She and Pedro V were not a pair built on spectacle but on shared purpose. Both were young, earnest, and deeply aware of their responsibilities. Their marriage, though brief, seemed marked by quiet understanding. Stephanie supported her husband's vision for a healthier, more enlightened Portugal, and he, in turn, valued her counsel and compassion. Yet court life was not without its challenges. Stephanie faced pressure to produce an heir, and whispers of uncertainty sometimes circled her foreignness. Still, she bore these burdens with composure, focusing her energy on meaningful service rather than royal performance. In public events, her calm demeanor reassured the people. In private, her correspondence revealed a woman learning to adapt, to serve, and to care. Her reign may have been short, but it was never shallow. In palace corridors and Lisbon's streets alike, Stephanie left behind a legacy of sincerity, not grand proclamations, but small, steadfast acts of kindness. She had begun to weave herself into the fabric of a nation, but history would not grant her more time. In the early summer of 1859, as Lisbon basked in sunlight and celebration, a quiet fear began to grow behind the palace walls. Queen Stephanie had fallen ill, first with fatigue, then with fever, and finally with symptoms too severe to ignore. The diagnosis soon followed: diphtheria, a disease that had swept through Europe with deadly consequences. For a queen barely 22 years old, it was a cruel and sudden affliction. News of her illness spread quickly. Doctors were summoned from across the kingdom, and the best physicians in Lisbon attended her bedside. Despite their efforts, her condition worsened. The royal household grew hushed. The corridors, once filled with ceremony, now echoed with anxious footsteps and whispered prayers. King Pedro remained close to her, his concern evident in every moment. The people, who had so recently cheered her name in the streets, now gathered in silent vigil. Churches were filled with citizens lighting candles, offering prayers for a queen who had shown them kindness in hospitals and hope in public life. Newspapers issued cautious updates. The sense of national unease was unmistakable. This was not just a royal illness, but a shared sorrow unfolding in real time. Stephanie's body, weakened by the swift attack of the disease, did not respond to treatment. In letters later preserved by her family, it was clear that her strength had never dimmed, but even her resolve could not hold back the tide. As her condition worsened, Portugal held its breath. On the 17th of July in the year 1859, Queen Stephanie of Portugal passed away inside Necessidade's palace. Her death, at just 22 years old, sent a wave of grief across the nation. The illness that had gripped her body for days had finally silenced a life filled with promise, compassion, and unspoken dreams. For many, The shock was not only in her passing, but in how swiftly she had been taken. King Pedro was devastated. Those closest to the palace recalled his silent grief, his long hours beside her bed, and his refusal to entertain political matters in the days that followed. Stephanie's body was carefully prepared for public mourning, dressed in white and laid in solemn dignity. Thousands filed past her casket, weeping quietly, offering prayers, or simply standing in stunned silence. A state funeral was held with full royal honors. Bells tolled across Lisbon as her cortege made its way through the city. Flowers were thrown from balconies, and shopkeepers closed their doors in respect. She was laid to rest in the Braganza Pantheon within the monastery of St. Vincent de Fora, a final resting place among the royal lineage she had briefly joined. But Stephanie's farewell was not just ceremonial. It was deeply personal. The people remembered the queen who had visited their hospitals, smiled gently from balconies, and seemed to carry her crown with humility. In her short reign, she had earned not just admiration, but affection. Though her time in Portugal was heartbreakingly short, Queen Stephanie's legacy left an imprint far greater than the span of her 22 years. In the public memory, she was not just the foreign queen who died young. She became a symbol of selfless grace, quiet reform, and youthful devotion to a nation that had scarcely begun to know her. Her death created not a void of policy, but a silence of affection. In the hospitals she visited, her name was spoken with reverence. In the homes of Lisbon's working class, her portrait hung beside saints and kings. Institutions bearing her name soon followed. Hospitals, charities, and foundations across Portugal honored the memory of the queen who had championed their cause. The Queen Stephanie Hospital in Lisbon became one of the most notable, a lasting tribute to her compassion for the sick and suffering. Even as political regimes shifted, her gentle impact was not forgotten. She had entered the country as a bride of diplomacy, but she departed as a queen of the people. For King Pedro V, the loss was deeply personal. He never remarried. His reign, already marked by reformist ideals, was clouded by the shadow of grief. In private writings, he referred to Stephanie with tenderness and sorrow, his words etched with the sadness of a future never lived. Decades later, historians would look back on Stephanie's brief presence as a quiet turning point, a reminder that royalty could be more than tradition, that true nobility was often found not in marble halls, but in the hospitals, letters, and lives touched by empathy. She may not have reigned long enough to shape dynasties or heirs, but in Portugal, Stephanie of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen was remembered with a love that outlasted politics. She became a cherished figure, frozen in youthful kindness, a queen who gave her heart before fate could take her crown. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Elisabeth of Wied was born on the 29th of December in the year 1843 at Schloss Monrepos in Neuwied in the Duchy of Nassau. How did this German princess, once rejected by the British crown, rise to become the first queen of a young and fragile nation? What loss shattered her peace and shaped her soul? And how did she transform personal tragedy into artistic legacy, all under the name Carmen Sylva? Elisabeth's early life began in the picturesque surroundings of Schloss Monrepos, where art, nature, and aristocracy shaped her identity. The daughter of Hermann, Prince of Wied, and Princess Marie of Nassau, she was raised in a household that combined noble tradition with intellectual curiosity. Her parents encouraged independent thinking, and young Elisabeth flourished in a world that prized both imagination and decorum. From an early age, Elisabeth displayed unusual sensitivity and creative flair. She was drawn to poetry, music, and the natural world. Her education went beyond languages and formal court protocol. she was introduced to philosophy, spiritual reflection, and literature. Family evenings often included readings, piano recitals, or long walks in the garden where she was allowed to dream beyond the borders of royalty. Yet even in those early days, there were whispers of greater plans. Her lineage made her a potential match for Europe's prominent princes. Though the crown of Britain would slip away, another throne, far more complex and uncertain, awaited her. And so began the path of a princess destined to become Romania's queen, a woman whose heart would carry both poetry and pain. Elisabeth's upbringing was far from typical for a 19th-century princess. In the quiet halls of Schloss Monrepos, she developed a deep connection to the arts, the spirit, and the hidden rhythms of the world around her. From a young age, she was drawn to music, painting, and poetry, but also to silence, solitude, and the mystery of thought. Her world was one of contrast, royal duties on one side and whispered dreams on the other. Her parents, especially her mother Princess Marie, allowed her room to explore these inner landscapes. Though she was taught court etiquette and noble protocol, Elisabeth's real education came through books, long walks in the countryside, and private reflections. She kept journals filled with sketches, ideas, and verses. Her earliest poetry hinted at a mind that viewed life through a poetic, almost otherworldly lens. Elisabeth's fascination with spirituality often led her down paths that alarmed or confused those around her. She once attended seances, visited asylums out of curiosity and empathy, and wrote haunting reflections on suffering and death. She was not content to be molded into a docile royal bride. She questioned, she wandered, and she observed. This eccentricity set her apart even as a teenager. At social gatherings, she often stood in quiet corners, not out of shyness, but introspection. While other girls were coached in charm, Elisabeth wrote verses about lost souls and the sadness of unspoken truths. Even then, it was clear her destiny would not be confined to silk gowns and palace dances. She was not merely a princess. She was already becoming Carmen Sylva, the queen who would one day speak through stories instead of decrees. In the intricate web of Europe's royal matchmaking, Elisabeth of Wied once stood at the edge of a powerful throne, the future of the British crown. At the age of 16, she was quietly proposed as a potential bride for Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, who would later become King Edward VII. Queen Victoria herself favored Elisabeth, admiring her background, intelligence, and quiet grace. For a brief moment, it seemed the German princess might become the future queen of the British Empire. She was sent to spend time at the Berlin court, where her manners, education, and demeanor would be more closely observed. The hope was that, under the watchful eye of Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Victoria, Elisabeth would be seen as a worthy match, but the outcome was not in her favor. Princess Victoria, reporting back to the Queen, noted that Elisabeth lacked the visual charm that would appeal to the prince, describing her as thoughtful but not striking. Meanwhile, the young Albert Edward showed little interest. Shown her portrait, he declined to even take a second glance. His heart leaned instead toward Alexandra of Denmark, a livelier figure with a style more suited to his tastes. For Elisabeth, the rejection was quiet but profound. Though no scandal followed, it was a formative moment. She would not marry into the most powerful empire of her time. But this royal bypass would eventually steer her to a different throne, one not built on centuries of empire, but on a nation still shaping its soul. Romania awaited, and so did a legacy no British crown could have promised. Elisabeth first met Prince Karl of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen in Berlin in the early 1860s, a city teeming with political energy, imperial ambition, and carefully orchestrated royal gatherings. The encounter, though brief, left an impression. Karl, quiet and disciplined, was a military man with a serious demeanor and a sense of duty that mirrored Elisabeth's own depth of thought. Their worlds were different, but something about their solemn temperaments seemed quietly aligned. Years passed. In the late 1860s, Karl had become Prince Carol of Romania, newly installed as ruler of a small but strategically important country in southeastern Europe. Romania, then a principality, needed stability and legitimacy. A marriage to a well-bred, respectable, and intellectual German princess could provide just that. In 1869, while seeking a consort who could support his vision for a modern Romania, Carol revisited his earlier impression of Elisabeth. He returned to Germany with a purpose. Their reunion in Neuwied was not one of grand romance or theatrical declarations, but of mutual recognition. Elisabeth, too, was older, more thoughtful, and had grown further into her poetic and inward ways. Yet in Carol, she saw not just a ruler, but a man of steadfast purpose. The proposal was made and accepted with quiet understanding. It was a union born not of dramatic love, but of shared discipline and complementary strength. In November of that year, they were married. Elisabeth, now Princess of Romania, had begun the next chapter of her life, one that would take her far from German forests and into the heart of a young and fragile kingdom. On the 15th of November in the year 1869, Princess Elisabeth of Wied married Prince Carol of Romania in a solemn ceremony held in her hometown of Neuwied. The marriage brought together two contrasting personalities: Elisabeth, the introspective and imaginative daughter of a German noble house, and Carol, the austere and duty-bound leader of a nation still carving its identity. Though their bond was not built on passion, it was forged through mutual respect and purpose. Carol had accepted the crown of Romania only a few years earlier, under difficult political circumstances. He had inherited a principality struggling for legitimacy, surrounded by empires and striving for unity. In Elisabeth, he found not only royal blood, but a poised and articulate woman who could offer the court a measure of elegance, intellect, and credibility. For Elisabeth, the decision meant leaving behind her homeland and familiar customs. She traveled to Romania not just as a bride, but as a symbol of stability for a young monarchy. Upon her arrival, she was met with cautious curiosity. Romanian society, still rooted in tradition, viewed her through a lens of expectation. Would this foreign princess understand their struggles, their hopes? She entered a palace different from the grand courts of Western Europe, less adorned, more intimate, yet full of ambition. In time, Elisabeth would learn the language, the customs, and the spirit of her adopted country. But as the royal couple began their life together, the foundation was set, a marriage anchored in duty, with two lives that would soon be shaped by triumphs, heartbreak, and the burdens of a rising throne. Elisabeth's arrival in Romania marked the beginning of a quiet but profound transformation. The principality was not the polished world she had left behind in Germany. It was complex, rustic in parts, and still recovering from political uncertainty. Yet in this new land, Elisabeth found both challenge and purpose. She was no longer just a noble daughter. She was now the princess consort of a rising state, expected to inspire loyalty, confidence, and refinement. At first, life in Bucharest was marked by cultural distance. The court was smaller, the customs unfamiliar, and the language foreign. Elisabeth, however, approached these differences not with disdain but with curiosity. She began learning Romanian, immersed herself in folklore and peasant traditions, and listened to the concerns of those around her. Slowly, her presence became more than symbolic, it became personal. Though Carol was often occupied with political affairs, Elisabeth sought to create a royal household that felt grounded and serene. She brought with her a love of nature, filling the royal gardens with flowers and organizing intimate literary salons. Her rooms were filled with books, music, and sketches, small sanctuaries that offered her peace. But she also struggled with loneliness. Her poetic nature, already prone to melancholy, was sometimes overwhelmed by the weight of expectation. She confided her doubts in letters and journals, and yet remained composed in public. Behind every appearance was a woman searching for meaning in her new role, not through grandeur, but through empathy. In this unfamiliar kingdom, Elisabeth of Wied slowly began shaping the role of queen not as a ruler above the people, but as a soul among them. In 1870, Elisabeth experienced one of the most cherished moments of her life, the birth of her only child, Princess Maria of Romania. The arrival of a daughter brought light into the royal household and offered a deeply personal joy to both Elisabeth and Carol. Though Romania still faced political and social uncertainty, the birth of a royal heir seemed to promise continuity and hope. For Elisabeth, the moment was filled with quiet wonder and maternal pride. She doted on Maria with tenderness and warmth, often retreating from court life to spend time alone with her infant daughter. Friends and observers noted how the queen seemed most at peace in these early years of motherhood, sketching images of Maria, singing lullabies, and journaling about the small joys of watching her grow. But fate had other plans. In 1874, when Maria was just 3 years old, she fell gravely ill. Despite all efforts from doctors and prayers from the nation, the little princess died, her life cut tragically short. The loss devastated Elisabeth. She withdrew from court functions and fell into a prolonged period of mourning, both silent and profound. For a woman already attuned to sorrow, the death of her only child marked a turning point in her soul. Elisabeth never truly recovered from the loss. Her writings from this period became darker, more introspective. Where once poetry had been a gentle pastime, it now became a sanctuary, the only place where she could safely speak her grief. Maria's brief presence had given Elisabeth the deepest of joys, and her absence would cast a quiet shadow over everything that followed. In the spring of 1881, Romania was officially proclaimed a kingdom, a symbolic and political milestone that marked the country's growing independence and strength. With this proclamation, Prince Carol became King Carol I, and Elisabeth, already known to the people for her grace and charitable spirit, was crowned the first queen of Romania. The coronation on the 10th of May was steeped in ceremony, but for Elisabeth, it was more than a title, it was a new responsibility. The event itself was grand yet modest, reflecting the nation's character, proud, emerging, and conscious of its place between larger empires. Elisabeth stood beside her husband not as a decorative consort, but as a quiet pillar, embodying both European refinement and Romanian identity. The people, still recovering from decades of foreign interference, looked to her as a motherly figure, someone who had embraced their land, language, and soul. Elisabeth had by then become fluent in Romanian, and her love for local traditions, especially folk songs, crafts, and stories, had endeared her to villagers and aristocrats alike. Though the death of her daughter still lingered in her heart, the crown offered a new purpose. She was no longer just a foreign princess. She was Romania's queen. From the royal court in Bucharest to the hills of Sinaia, Elisabeth began reshaping the image of monarchy in Romania. She brought cultural life into the palace, encouraged the arts, and supported education and health initiatives. The coronation marked not just a rise in rank, but a deeper merging of identities. Elisabeth of Wied had become Carmen Sylva, and Romania had gained a queen who saw herself as both artist and servant. As Queen of Romania, Elisabeth embraced her role not with pomp, but with purpose. Her most defining contributions came not from palace ceremonies, but from her tireless devotion to public welfare, especially during times of crisis. when the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 erupted, which Romania considers its war of independence, Elisabeth became a beacon of compassion in a nation under strain. She organized hospitals, visited the wounded, and mobilized resources to support soldiers and civilians alike. With sleeves rolled and duties embraced, she offered more than sympathy, she offered action. To recognize those who worked alongside her, she founded the Decoration of the Cross of Queen Elizabeth, a medal honoring service to the sick and injured during wartime. For many, it was not just a token, but a mark of the Queen's sincere appreciation. Elizabeth's dedication extended beyond war relief. She championed the causes of education, women's rights, and health care. She was instrumental in fostering higher education for women in Romania, a bold move in a conservative society. She also helped establish the National Society for the Blind and became the first royal patron of the Romanian Red Cross. Her efforts reflected a belief that monarchy should serve the people, not just represent them. She rarely sought praise and often worked quietly behind the scenes, letting others take credit for programs she helped inspire. In a world where queens were often expected to smile and stand still, Elizabeth moved with conviction. Her reign, though marked by loss, grew brighter with every life she touched, not through command, but through care. Behind the title of queen lived a writer whose voice would echo across Europe, known not as Elizabeth, but as Carmen Sylva, meaning Song of the Forest. This literary identity became Elizabeth's sanctuary, her second crown, and the truest expression of her inner world. In the solitude of her royal chambers and the quiet of Romania's countryside, she penned poetry, aphorisms, novels, and folklore, often in 4 languages: German, Romanian, French, and English. Her earliest works appeared in the 1880s, only a few years after her daughter's passing. Writing became both a refuge and a mission, a way to reflect on sorrow, faith, and the complexities of womanhood. She didn't hide behind her pseudonym, rather she used it as a veil of humility, allowing her words to stand apart from her crown. She wrote for the soul, not for the throne. The European literary world took notice. Her prose meditations, such as Les Pensées d'une Rienie, earned recognition from the Académie Française, while her German volumes like Vom Amboss revealed a philosophical depth rare among royals. She later collaborated with Mike Krebnitz, a close companion and lady-in-waiting, under the shared pen name Dito et Idem, producing plays and stories rich in emotion and folklore. In the palace, Elizabeth was a queen, but in her writings she was a pilgrim of the human spirit. As Carmen Sylva, she spoke not to governments or courts, but to hearts. Her words gave voice to longing, to resilience, and to beauty found in silence, and for many, they brought comfort that no decree or crown ever could. Carmen Sylva was more than a pseudonym. It was a world of feeling, woven through verses, stories, and philosophical reflections. Elizabeth's writings touched every genre: lyrical poetry, moral essays, fairy tales, tragic plays, and historical fiction. Her work was deeply personal yet widely resonant, inspired by Romanian folklore, spiritual musings, and the quiet pain she carried within her. Her poetry collections explored themes of grief, duty, and the fleeting nature of life. Titles like Sappho, Hammerstein, and Sweet Hours revealed her blend of classical structure with emotional candor. But it was in prose that she truly bared her soul. Les Pensées d'une Rienie. The Thoughts of a Queen was not just awarded by the Académie Française. It became a mirror of Elizabeth's inner landscape, filled with sharp observations, gentle wisdom, and poetic paradoxes. She was also a translator, bringing Romanian tales to European readers. In The Bard of the Dâmbovița, a collection co-translated with Alma Stretel, She preserved the voices of Romanian peasants, their songs, sadness, and simple hopes, introducing their culture to the wider world with reverence and beauty. Collaborations with Mite Kremnitz brought even more creative depth. Under Dito et Idem, they published works like Anna Bolin and In der Era, exploring historical tragedy and psychological introspection. Through each pen stroke, Elisabeth wove grief into grace. For Elisabeth, writing was more than an art, it was a calling. While others ruled through policy, she ruled through metaphor. As Carmen Sylva, she became a queen of letters, turning loss into lyric, silence into story, and monarchy into meaning. In the late 1880s, the Romanian court was shaken by a quiet scandal, one that entwined politics, romance, and the queen's own hand. The heir to the throne, Prince Ferdinand, had been adopted by King Carol after the death of their only daughter. Still young and unfamiliar with his new country, Ferdinand found solace in the palace and in the company of one of Elizabeth's closest ladies-in-waiting, Elena Vaquerescu. Elena was intelligent, poetic, and Romanian by birth, and Elizabeth adored her. The queen encouraged their friendship, perhaps even their budding romance, though she knew full well that Romanian law forbade a member of the royal family from marrying a Romanian citizen. But Elizabeth, ever the dreamer, believed in love over law, poetry over protocol. She supported the match quietly, thinking perhaps it could soften the court and bind Ferdinand to the people. When the affair came to light, it caused uproar. Parliament objected. Advisors were furious. King Carol was outraged. A constitutional crisis loomed and swift action was taken. Elena was exiled to Paris. Prince Ferdinand was sent on a long diplomatic tour. And Elizabeth, whose encouragement had fanned the flames, was quietly exiled to her native Neuwied. The incident stunned the nation and changed Elizabeth's standing at court. Though she would later return, her influence was never the same. The Vaquerescu affair painted her not as a sovereign queen, but as a sentimental idealist, one who allowed dreams to outstep duty. But for Elizabeth, the exile was also a return to herself. Far from the throne, she wrote more, reflected deeper, and embraced again the world where Carmen Sylva, not the queen, could truly reign. Among the many contradictions that shaped Elisabeth of Wied's life, one stands quietly yet powerfully apart: her belief that monarchy, the very institution she embodied, was fundamentally flawed. In the privacy of her journals, she wrote with surprising honesty about her sympathy for Republican ideals and her growing disillusionment with the royal order. She once reflected, "The Republican form of government is the only rational one. I can never understand the foolish people, the fact that they continue to tolerate us." These words were never spoken aloud in public, but they reveal a queen who was painfully aware of the social distance between ruler and ruled. Elizabeth saw the corruption, the vanity, and the stagnation of the noble class, and she could not pretend to admire it. Her support for the common people was more than poetic sentiment. She admired the dignity of farmers, the wisdom in folk stories, and the perseverance of those who had no titles. As Carmen Sylva, she wrote of their struggles with empathy. As queen, she quietly questioned why they remained beneath a crown. This internal conflict deepened after the death of her daughter and the exile from court. With fewer court duties and more time for reflection, Elizabeth allowed her pen to wander freely into dangerous territory, crafting essays, verses, and thoughts that challenged hierarchy and celebrated equality. She never led a revolution, nor did she abandon her role. But within her lived a sovereign who longed to see a world less divided, where kindness replaced protocol, and where a woman like her might be valued not for her crown, but for her truth. In her heart, Elizabeth had become the queen who understood why queens should not rule forever. As the years passed and Romania changed, Elisabeth of Wied gradually retreated from the center of public life. After King Carol's long reign and the sorrow of personal losses, she entered her twilight years not in grand halls, but in quiet reflection. Living between palaces in Bucharest and retreats in Sinaia, she turned ever more inward, continuing to write, to observe, and to remember. The world around her had grown turbulent. Europe edged toward war, and modernity crept into the edges of the old order. But Elisabeth, now in her 70s, was less concerned with politics than with memory. Her days were filled with writing memoirs, tending to gardens, reading philosophy, and reflecting on the people and events that had shaped her life. She maintained correspondence with artists, poets, and thinkers, and her name as Carmen Sylva continued to carry weight in literary circles. Yet she remained distant from state affairs. Romania was preparing for a future she would not see, and Elisabeth seemed to understand her place as a bridge between two eras. She often walked in the gardens alone, accompanied only by her thoughts and the echoes of verses she had once written in grief and in grace. Her published work From Memory's Shrine offered a glimpse into her aging mind, filled with affection, regret, wisdom, and longing. She did not ask for adoration. She had learned too well how fleeting that was. In those final years, Elisabeth was not just Romania's first queen. She was its first royal philosopher, a woman who had turned sorrow into art and solitude into legacy. Even as her footsteps slowed, her words remained, etched into the soul of a nation still learning how to remember her. On the 2nd of March in the year 1916, Elisabeth of Wied passed away at the Golescu mansion in Bucharest. She was 72 years old. Her death came during the shadows of a world war and at a time when Romania stood at the edge of great change. Yet even in that turbulent moment, the nation paused to mourn the woman who had become more than a queen, a voice, a witness, a soul among them. Her funeral procession moved through Bucharest with solemn reverence. Citizens, nobles, soldiers, and artists alike gathered to pay tribute. She was laid to rest at the Curtea de Argeș Cathedral, the final resting place of Romanian royalty. But her legacy did not lie in marble alone. It lived on in the hospitals she helped establish, the schools she supported, and the countless lives she touched through her service and her pen. Carmen Sylva's writings continued to circulate, translated into dozens of languages. Her stories of love, grief, and Romanian folklore introduced the world to the spirit of a land that had once been seen as distant and mysterious. She preserved its legends, honored its people, and offered a human portrait of monarchy that was rare and deeply felt. Statues of Elisabeth would rise in the gardens of Peel's castle. Streets and institutions would carry her name. But perhaps her most enduring tribute was invisible, found in the quiet resilience of Romanian women who, like her, faced grief with grace, and in the poems whispered through generations. Elisabeth of Wied lived not for spectacle, but for spirit. She taught a young country how to dream, how to mourn, and how to find beauty even in brokenness. Her crown may have rested lightly, but her presence remains deeply rooted in verses, in memory, and in the silence where poetry is born. What do you think about Stephanie of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen? Was she a devoted queen who helped shape Portugal's modern monarchy, embracing her adopted land, guiding it with quiet grace, and embodying duty amid uncertainty? Or was she a forgotten figure, married young, burdened by expectations, and remembered only as a royal consort who faded too soon? And what about Elisabeth of Wied? Was she a queen of letters, a literary soul who turned grief into poetry, brought Romanian folklore to the world, and spoke to hearts as Carmen Sylva? Or was she a misunderstood dreamer, exiled by politics, haunted by sorrow, and too honest for the court she served? Were these women queens only in title or in the truest sense of spirit? Did they reshape their realms with compassion and conviction, or simply endure behind velvet curtains? In the end, were they symbols of royal strength or its silent cost? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if their stories moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more voices history tried to hush and the legacies that refused to fade. Thank you so much for watching.